Imagine an empire capable of defeating every army on land, yet terrified of the sea. It sounds impossible. When we think of ancient Rome, we picture disciplined legions, endless stone roads, and an empire stretching across the Mediterranean. But few people realize that during the 3rd century BC, the Romans knew almost nothing about naval warfare. To them, the sea was never a path to glory. It was a realm of storms, monsters, and death. For centuries, Rome's strength had always come from the land. Farmers became soldiers. Fields became training grounds. Every Roman citizen was taught to fight shoulder to shoulder in tight formations, holding the line with unwavering discipline. Everything they learned prepared them to conquer solid ground. Nothing prepared them to conquer the sea. Meanwhile, across the Mediterranean, another civilization had grown into the exact opposite: Carthage. If Rome was born from the soil, Carthage was born from the waves. Descended from the great Phoenician seafarers, the Carthaginians had spent centuries mastering the winds, currents, and the art of shipbuilding. To them, a warship was more than a vessel. It was an extension of the human body. Their sailors could read the wind by feel alone. They knew every harbor, every current, and every hidden reef across the Mediterranean. Their navy was the most powerful fleet in the known world. Hundreds of warships patrolled the seas from Spain to Sicily and North Africa. For generations, no rival dared challenge their dominance. The Mediterranean belonged to Carthage. Rome knew it. The Romans had never imagined they would one day fight a war against a naval superpower, until history forced them to. Everything began on the island of Sicily. It wasn't simply the largest island in the Mediterranean. It was the crossroads of ancient trade, controlling the sea lanes between east and west. Whoever controlled Sicily could dominate the central Mediterranean. Both Rome and Carthage understood its strategic importance. Neither side was willing to surrender it. What began as a local conflict soon escalated. In 264 BC, the First Punic War erupted. At first, events unfolded exactly as Rome expected. Roman legions marched across Sicily, defeating Carthaginian forces city after city. Fortresses fell. Garrisons surrendered. Victory seemed inevitable. But then, the Romans discovered they were fighting a completely different kind of enemy. Every time a Carthaginian city seemed ready to collapse, sails appeared on the horizon. Warships arrived carrying fresh soldiers, supplies, weapons, food. Every Roman siege became a frustrating cycle. No matter how many victories they won on land, Carthage simply reinforced its positions by sea. Defeating the enemy's army wasn't enough, because the sea still belonged to Carthage. Worse still, while Roman legions remained occupied in Sicily, the Carthaginian navy struck directly at the Italian coastline. Coastal villages burned. Merchant ships disappeared. Granaries were destroyed. Trade routes were disrupted. Rome could do almost nothing to stop it. Not because its soldiers lacked courage, but because Rome barely had a navy. An empire that ruled most of the Italian peninsula suddenly found itself helpless against attacks arriving from the sea. It was more than a military problem. It was a humiliation. The Roman Senate quickly realized they faced a decision that would determine the future of the Republic. Either abandon Sicily or learn to conquer the sea. But how? Rome possessed almost none of the things required to build a great navy. No major shipyards. No naval engineers. No experienced admirals. Very few sailors. Even skilled oarsmen were difficult to find. Building a fleet from scratch using traditional methods would take decades. Carthage would not wait. The war was happening now. Rome needed a miracle. And strangely enough, a miracle arrived. After a violent storm, a Carthaginian warship was blown onto the Italian coast, almost completely intact. It was an extraordinary stroke of luck. For the first time in history, Roman engineers could examine the world's most advanced warship up close. They wasted no time. The vessel was carefully dismantled. Every plank was measured, every joint inspected, every beam recorded. The Romans were not simply copying the ship. They wanted to understand why it worked. Why it moved so quickly. Why it turned so smoothly. Why it remained stable, even in rough water. Centuries of Carthaginian naval knowledge now lay exposed on an Italian beach. Hungrovers. But copying the ship was only the beginning. Rome had never been famous for invention. Its greatest strength had always been organization. If Carthage mastered the art of sailing, Rome mastered the art of mobilization. The Senate immediately ordered timber to be gathered from forests across Italy. Thousands of trees were cut down. Thousands of carpenters were recruited. Shipyards worked day and night. Instead of building each vessel individually, Roman engineers standardized every major component: the keel, the ribs, the hull planks, the masts, the oars. Each part was built according to the same measurements. This allowed ships to be assembled almost like pieces of a giant puzzle. For perhaps the first time in history, warships were being produced through something resembling an assembly line. It was an astonishing achievement for the ancient world. Within only a few months, more than 100 warships stood ready. Even Carthage was surprised by the speed. But wooden ships alone could never win a war. Rome still lacked something far more difficult to build: people. Each quinquereme required nearly 300 oarsmen. Thousands upon thousands of men would need to work together with perfect rhythm. Without coordination, even the finest warship became nothing more than a drifting piece of wood. Training experienced crews normally took years. Rome had only months. Once again, the Romans refused to accept the impossible. Instead, they came up with an idea no one had ever tried before. Instead of teaching sailors at sea, they would teach them on land. How Rome turned the sea into another battlefield. A fleet of more than 100 warships now floated in Roman harbors. From a distance, they looked impressive. Long rows of oars stretched from both sides of each vessel. Bronze rams gleamed beneath their bows. Tall masts towered above freshly built decks. To anyone watching from the shore, Rome finally appeared to possess a navy worthy of challenging Carthage. But appearances can be dangerously misleading. The ships were ready. The men were not. Unlike the Carthaginians, whose sailors had spent their entire lives at sea, most Roman recruits had never sailed farther than a fishing boat close to shore. Many had grown up hundreds of kilometers inland. Some had never even seen the Mediterranean before being recruited. And now, they were expected to operate one of the most complicated military machines of the ancient world. A single quinquereme required nearly 300 oarsmen. Every stroke had to be perfectly synchronized. If one section rowed too fast, the ship veered off course. If another slowed down, the vessel lost speed. If panic spread among the crew during battle, the entire ship became useless. Rome couldn't afford years of training. The First Punic War was already raging. Every month spent preparing meant another month of Carthaginian dominance at sea. So once again, the Romans asked themselves a simple question. If they couldn't train like sailors, could they train like soldiers? The answer changed naval history forever. Reinvented. Instead of sending recruits onto dangerous waters, Roman commanders built enormous training camps along the Italian coast. Inside these camps stood strange wooden structures. At first glance, they resembled unfinished ships resting on dry land. Rows of benches were carefully installed. Long wooden beams replaced oars. Every detail matched the dimensions of an actual warship. Hundreds of recruits climbed aboard these stationary platforms every day. An officer stood at the front with a wooden hammer. Another carried a flute. The rhythm began slowly. One strike. One pull. Again. 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 Hour after hour, thousands of men practiced rowing without touching the sea. They learned to move as one. Not 50 men. Not 100 men. 300 bodies moving with absolute precision. The training was exhausting. Blisters covered their hands. Their backs ached. Many collapsed from fatigue. But Roman discipline had always relied on repetition. Whether building roads, marching across mountains, or fighting in battle, the Romans believed perfection came through relentless practice. By the time these recruits finally boarded real ships, Rowing together had already become instinct. The sea itself would be unfamiliar. The movement would not. It was an ingenious solution. Safe, efficient, scalable, and uniquely Roman. Yet even with trained crews, one enormous problem remained. The Carthaginians were still better sailors. Far better. For generations, they had mastered naval tactics based on speed and maneuverability. Their captains knew exactly when to accelerate, when to turn, when to strike. Their greatest weapon wasn't the ship itself. It was the bronze ram mounted beneath the bow. Naval combat in the ancient world revolved around one objective: smash the enemy's hull before they could hit yours. A skilled captain would approach from the side, avoid incoming attacks, then slam the bronze ram directly into an opponent's vulnerable flank. Water rushed inside. The damaged vessel sank. Victory often depended on who maneuvered faster. And that was precisely where Rome was weakest. The Romans knew they couldn't outsail Carthage. Not this year. Not even in the next decade. Trying to fight by Carthage's rules would end in disaster. So they made an extraordinary decision. Instead of becoming better sailors, they would make sailors fight like Roman infantry. It sounded absurd. How do you turn a naval battle into a land battle? The answer came from an unknown Roman engineer. His invention would become one of the most famous military innovations of the ancient world. The corvus. The raven. The device itself looked surprisingly simple. A heavy wooden bridge, nearly 11 meters long. Just wide enough for two soldiers to cross side by side. It stood vertically at the bow of every Roman warship. At its far end hung a massive iron spike. Curved. Sharp. Resembling the beak of a raven. Hence its name. At first glance, it looked awkward. Even clumsy. Carthaginian captains laughed when they first saw it. Some assumed it was decorative. Others believed it served no military purpose at all. They would soon regret that mistake. The operation was brilliantly straightforward. As enemy ships approached for a traditional ramming attack, Roman vessels deliberately held their course. Instead of trying to outmaneuver the enemy, they waited. Closer. Closer still. Until the two ships nearly touched. Then, the rope holding the corvus upright was released. The enormous bridge crashed downward with tremendous force. The iron spike punched straight through the enemy deck. Wood splintered. The two ships locked together instantly. The Carthaginian captain suddenly lost his greatest advantage: freedom. His ship could no longer turn away. It could no longer accelerate. It could no longer escape. The sea battle was over. A land battle had begun. The moment the bridge struck, Roman legionaries charged across. Heavy shields locked together. Short swords drawn. Helmets gleaming. This was no longer a contest between sailors. It was infantry combat. Exactly the kind of fighting Rome had perfected over centuries. The Carthaginian crews were completely unprepared. Most consisted of professional sailors and oarsmen. Only a small number served as marines. Against disciplined Roman legionaries, they stood little chance. Deck after deck became bloody battlegrounds. Ships that had once danced across the Mediterranean now resembled floating fortresses under siege. The brilliance of the corvus lay not in its engineering. It lay in its philosophy. Rome never tried to surpass Carthage at what Carthage did best. Instead, Rome forced Carthage to fight a completely different war. Every Roman strength became stronger. Every Carthaginian strength became useless. This was asymmetric warfare, more than 2,000 years before the term existed. By 260 BC, the Roman fleet was finally ready. Hundreds of newly built warships assembled off the Sicilian coast. Across the water waited the veteran navy of Carthage. Its commanders had every reason to feel confident. They faced an enemy with almost no naval tradition. Most Roman crews had only recently learned to row. Many had never fought at sea. Victory seemed inevitable. The Carthaginians advanced aggressively. exactly as Roman commanders had hoped. What happened next would shock the ancient world. The first enemy ships rushed forward, preparing to ram the clumsy Roman vessels. Instead, heavy wooden bridges suddenly crashed onto their decks. Iron spikes tore through timber. Roman legionaries stormed across before anyone understood what was happening. One Carthaginian ship fell. Then another. Then another. Within hours, the greatest naval power in the Mediterranean found itself fighting battles it had never trained for. The Battle of Mylae had become something entirely unexpected. Not a contest of ships, but a contest of soldiers. And in that contest, Rome was almost unbeatable. For the first time in its history, the Republic defeated Carthage in a major naval engagement. The victory echoed throughout the Mediterranean. The impossible had happened. A nation that had feared the sea only a few years earlier had just defeated the world's greatest navy. Not by copying its enemy, but by rewriting the rules of naval warfare itself. The corvus had done far more than win a battle. It had transformed Rome from a land power learning to survive at sea into a rising maritime empire. Yet this astonishing invention would eventually reveal a dangerous flaw that nearly destroyed the very fleet it had helped create. How Rome defeated Carthage and became the master of the Mediterranean. The victory at Mylae changed everything. For the first time in history, a nation with virtually no naval tradition had defeated the greatest maritime power in the known world. News spread across the Mediterranean with astonishing speed. City-states that had remained neutral began looking at Rome differently. Rome was no longer just a land power. It had proven that Carthage was not invincible. But for the Romans, pause 0.5 was only the beginning. Winning one battle did not mean winning the war. As long as Carthage controlled the sea, the conflict could never truly end. If Rome wanted total victory, it would have to do something once considered impossible: carry the war directly to Carthage itself. And there was only one way to do that: across the sea. Handvandrailers. Over the following years, Roman shipyards worked without pause. Forests throughout the Italian peninsula were cut down to supply timber. Logs floated down rivers and were hauled into busy coastal shipyards. Every victory brought captured enemy vessels. Every defeat became another lesson. Rome was no longer simply copying Carthaginian designs. Its engineers began making improvements. Hulls were reinforced. Construction methods were refined. Repair procedures were standardized. Every new warship was stronger than the one before it. What had once been Rome's greatest weakness was slowly becoming one of its greatest strengths. Within only a few years, the Roman fleet had expanded to an astonishing size. It was no longer built merely to defend Italy. It was capable of launching an invasion across the Mediterranean. Its destination was clear: North Africa, the heart of Carthage. Hungrangler, in 256 BC, one of the largest naval battles in ancient history unfolded off Cape Ecnomus, on the southern coast of Sicily. This was far more than a battle. It was a clash between two civilizations. Rome assembled roughly 330 warships, carrying nearly 40,000 soldiers. Carthage responded with around 350 warships, crewed by some of the most experienced sailors in the Mediterranean. Together, more than 600 ships and nearly 300,000 men took part in the confrontation. For centuries afterward, the world would rarely witness another naval battle on such a scale. The Mediterranean itself seemed covered with sails. War drums thundered. Trumpets echoed across the water. Thousands of oars struck the sea in perfect rhythm. The entire horizon appeared alive. The Carthaginian commanders had learned from Mylae. This time, they refused to charge directly into Roman boarding bridges. Instead, they attempted to split the Roman formation. Using superior speed, superior maneuverability, and generations of naval experience, they sought to attack from multiple directions at once. It was the style of warfare they had perfected over centuries. But Rome had learned as well. Roman commanders arranged their fleet in a massive wedge formation. Each squadron supported the others. If one ship came under attack, nearby vessels immediately moved to reinforce it. And whenever the distance closed, the corvus came crashing down. One Carthaginian ship was locked in place. Then another. Then another. Across the battlefield, enormous boarding bridges slammed onto enemy decks like giant traps. Roman legionaries stormed forward in wave after wave. Dozens of brutal hand-to-hand battles erupted simultaneously across the sea. After hours of relentless fighting, the Carthaginian fleet finally broke. Forced to retreat, Rome had won. The path to North Africa was open. It was a moment almost unimaginable only a few years earlier. A people who had once feared the sea were now crossing it to invade the greatest naval empire of their age. Roman legions landed on the African coast. At first, everything went according to plan. Town after town surrendered. Several territories fell under Roman control. Even the government of Carthage began to panic. But wars are rarely won so easily. In desperation, Carthage placed its army under the command of a Spartan mercenary general named Xanthippus. Unlike many Carthaginian commanders before him, Xanthippus carefully studied Roman tactics. He recognized their greatest strength, and he immediately identified their greatest weakness. Rather than confronting the legions in broken terrain where Roman infantry excelled, he chose wide-open plains, ground where cavalry and war elephants could unleash their full potential. The result was the Battle of the Bagradas River. The Roman army suffered a devastating defeat. Its African campaign collapsed. The surviving soldiers fled back toward the coast. Their only hope was to return home by sea. But an even greater disaster was waiting. As the Roman fleet sailed back toward Italy, nature struck. Without warning, a massive storm swept across the Mediterranean. Towering waves crashed against the ships. Hurricane-force winds howled through the fleet. Rain poured relentlessly from dark skies. The sea became an enemy far more dangerous than Carthage. Warship after warship disappeared beneath the waves. Some smashed against rocky coastlines. Others broke apart under the force of the storm. Entire crews vanished into the sea. Historians estimate that more than 300 Roman warships were lost in a single catastrophe. It remains one of the greatest naval disasters of the ancient world. The Romans were forced to ask a painful question. Why had their fleet proven so vulnerable? The answer stood at the bow of nearly every ship. The corvus. Hafengrommeler, the massive boarding bridge that had delivered victory, had also made every Roman warship dangerously unstable. The corvus was extremely heavy. Mounted high at the front of the vessel, it shifted the ship's balance forward. In calm seas, the design worked brilliantly. But in rough water, it became a deadly liability. The added weight made ships far more likely to capsize during violent storms. The very invention that had allowed Rome to defeat Carthage had nearly destroyed the Roman navy itself. The lesson was impossible to ignore. The Romans finally understood that they could not rely on a single invention forever. If they truly intended to rule the sea, they would have to become real sailors. The corvus had served its purpose. Its time was over. Over the following years, the famous boarding bridge gradually disappeared from Roman warships. It was one of the most important decisions in Roman naval history, because it marked a profound change in Roman thinking. No longer did Rome seek to turn naval battles into land battles. Now it intended to master naval warfare itself. Crews received far more advanced training. Admirals accumulated experience through years of continuous campaigning. Engineers refined ship designs with every new generation. The hulls became lighter, stronger, faster, more stable in rough seas. Roman warships no longer depended entirely on boarding actions. They could maneuver with increasing confidence, fight in coordinated formations, and challenge enemy fleets using genuine naval tactics. Little by little, Rome learned the very art that had taken Carthage centuries to perfect. What made Rome truly dangerous was not simply that it learned quickly. It was that it never stopped learning. Hanvergamer, after more than 20 years of relentless warfare, both republics stood exhausted. But once again, Rome's extraordinary ability to organize its resources made the difference. The Senate financed the construction of yet another fleet, supported largely by contributions from Rome's wealthiest families. It was a final gamble. In 241 BC, the two exhausted navies met near the Aegates Islands. This battle would decide the future of the Mediterranean. This time, there were no corvus bridges, no special inventions, no hidden advantages. Only warships, only trained crews, only experience. Rome fought not as a desperate land power struggling to survive at sea, but as a true naval power, and it won. The victory at the Battle of the Aegates Islands forced Carthage to sue for peace. The First Punic War was over. Sicily became Rome's first province beyond the Italian peninsula. More importantly, control of the Mediterranean had begun to change hands. Yet this was only the beginning. In the centuries that followed, the Roman navy would do far more than defeat Carthage. It would transform the entire Mediterranean into what the Romans proudly called Mare Nostrum, our sea. How the Roman navy turned the Mediterranean into our sea. The First Punic War had finally come to an end. For 23 relentless years, Rome and Carthage had fought across Sicily, the open sea, and the coast of North Africa. Both republics had lost hundreds of ships. Hundreds of thousands of men had perished. Entire fortunes had been spent. When peace was finally signed in 241 BC, neither side celebrated. They were simply exhausted. Yet beneath that fragile peace, something far greater had changed. For the first time in history, Rome had proven that it could survive and win in the sea. But victory over Carthage did not instantly make Rome the master of the Mediterranean. It merely opened the door. The empire still had much to learn. During the decades that followed, Roman naval strategy underwent a complete transformation. The navy was no longer viewed as a temporary force raised only during wartime. It became a permanent institution. New naval bases appeared throughout the Mediterranean. Dockyards expanded. Warehouses stocked timber, ropes, sails, and weapons. Experienced sailors remained in service instead of returning home after each campaign. The lessons learned during the Punic Wars became the foundation of a professional navy. Young officers studied navigation. Captains learned how to read winds and currents. Shipbuilders continued refining hull designs. The Romans had once borrowed knowledge from Carthage. Now they were creating naval traditions of their own. Then history presented Rome with another challenge, one far different from Carthage. The enemy this time was not an empire. It was piracy. By the 1st century BC, pirates had become the greatest threat to Mediterranean trade. They attacked merchant ships without warning, captured entire coastal towns, kidnapped wealthy travelers for ransom. Even Roman officials were not safe. At one point, pirates grew so bold that they raided ports only a short distance from Rome itself. The consequences reached far beyond stolen cargo. Rome depended heavily on imported grain, especially from Sicily, Sardinia, and Egypt. When pirate fleets disrupted shipping routes, grain prices soared. Food shortages spread throughout Italy. Political unrest followed. The sea that had become Rome's greatest highway was once again becoming its greatest vulnerability. The Senate realized that defeating scattered pirate bands, one at a time, would never solve the problem. Something unprecedented was required. Someone capable of commanding an operation larger than any anti-piracy campaign in history. That man was Gnaeus Pompeius Magnus. History remembers him simply as Pompey the Great. In 67 BC, the Roman Senate granted Pompey extraordinary powers. He was given command over the entire Mediterranean, hundreds of ships, thousands of soldiers, unlimited authority. Many senators feared that no single man should possess such power. But Rome had little choice. Trade had to be restored. The pirates had to disappear. Pompey approached the problem differently from every commander before him. Instead of chasing pirate fleets across the sea, He attacked the system that allowed piracy to survive. First, he divided the entire Mediterranean into 13 operational zones. Each zone received its own fleet and commander. Every squadron launched its offensive at the same time. The pirates suddenly found themselves trapped. In the past, whenever Roman forces attacked one region, pirate ships simply escaped to another. Now, there was nowhere left to run. Harbors were blockaded. Supply bases destroyed. Escape routes sealed. One region after another fell under Roman control. Within only 40 days, the western Mediterranean had been secured. Pompey immediately shifted his attention eastward, where the largest pirate strongholds remained. There, the campaign became even more decisive. 0.6's entire pirate fleet surrendered without fighting. Others were destroyed in open battle. By the end of the operation, a problem that had plagued the Mediterranean for generations had virtually disappeared. Ancient historians claimed the entire campaign lasted only about 3 months. Whether every detail is exact remains debated. But there is little doubt that Pompey's campaign stands among the most successful anti-piracy operations in history. Unrivaled, with piracy suppressed, the Mediterranean entered one of the safest periods in its ancient history. Merchant ships once again crossed the sea in enormous numbers. Grain flowed steadily toward Rome. Olive oil from Hispania. Wine from Gaul. Marble from Greece. Glass from Syria. Papyrus from Egypt. Spices from the east. All moved through a maritime network protected by Roman warships. The sea had become the empire's greatest highway. Its roads connected cities. Its fleets connected continents. Without naval security, the Roman Empire could never have survived. Han rulers, Roman warships served far more than military purposes. They transported entire legions from one frontier to another. They carried imperial officials across the empire. They escorted tax shipments, protected merchant convoys, delivered emergency grain during famines. Even the emperor himself often relied on naval transport for long-distance travel. The Roman navy became the invisible force holding together an empire stretching across Europe, Asia, and Africa. When historians speak of Roman roads, they often overlook an equally important truth. The Mediterranean itself was Rome's greatest road. As Roman control expanded, a new phrase began appearing throughout the empire: Mare Nostrum, our sea. It was more than a slogan. It reflected reality. Roman fleets patrolled nearly every major harbor, from the Strait of Gibraltar to the coasts of Syria, from southern Gaul to the shores of Egypt. Few powers remained capable of challenging Roman naval supremacy. For centuries, the Mediterranean existed not as a frontier separating civilizations, but as the center of a single empire. Unrivaled. Yet perhaps the most remarkable part of this story is not how Rome conquered the sea. It is how Rome learned to do it. At the beginning of the First Punic War, the Romans possessed almost nothing that defined a naval power. No experienced admirals. No tradition of seamanship. No major fleet. No centuries of maritime knowledge. Everything had to be built from the ground up. They copied. They experimented. They failed. They adapted. The corvus helped them survive long enough to learn. When it became a weakness, they abandoned it. They never allowed pride to stand in the way of improvement. That willingness to evolve became one of Rome's greatest strengths. Again and again throughout its history, Rome absorbed the knowledge of its enemies, refined it through discipline and organization, and ultimately turned it into something even more powerful. That was the true secret of Roman success. Not superior technology, not greater wealth, not even larger armies, but an unmatched ability to learn faster than anyone else. Centuries later, the Roman Empire would eventually decline. Its frontiers would collapse. Its legions would disappear. Its great cities would fall. But the legacy of the Roman navy endured. Its ports shaped future civilizations. Its maritime laws influenced later empires. Its methods of logistics, fleet organization, and coastal defense became models for generations of naval powers. And it all began with a republic that once feared the sea, a nation that looked across the Mediterranean and saw only danger, until one day it decided not to avoid the waves but to master them. From that moment on, the Mediterranean was no longer simply a body of water. It became the beating heart of an empire whose greatest victory was not defeating Carthage, but transforming itself. That is why the story of the Roman Navy is more than the story of ships and battles. It is the story of adaptation overcoming tradition, discipline overcoming experience, and determination overcoming impossibility. Because history's greatest empires are rarely those born with every advantage. More often, they are the ones willing to learn, change, and become something entirely new.